Imagine reaching the age of 100, surviving wars, illnesses, and time itself, only to discover that the most painful blow did not come from life's hardships but from those you once fed at your own table. The courtroom that morning seemed ordinary. A small matter sat on the docket, just another parking violation, a minor fine tied to an aging citizen's car. People shuffled papers, whispered among themselves, waiting for the familiar rhythm of routine justice. Then the bailiff called her name. Heads lifted, a centenarian slowly making her way toward the bench, leaning heavily on a wooden cane polished smooth from years of use, her back curved with time, her steps unsteady, yet her eyes faded, though they held something that unsettled even before she spoke. Caprio leaned forward, his tone gentle, almost amused. Ma'am, it's not every day we welcome someone who has lived a full century. That in itself deserves respect. Let's see what we have here, just a small parking ticket. A soft ripple of laughter crossed the room, as if the case had already been dismissed in spirit. What harm could such a woman cause? But before the judge could continue, she raised her hand, her voice trembling yet firm. Your Honor, this car it isn't mine, and this fine. This is the least of my troubles. The courtroom fell silent, a hush so complete it seemed even the old ceiling fan stopped humming. The judge's smile faded, his eyes narrowing in concern. She straightened her frail shoulders and spoke again, words dragging slowly, but with a weight that pulled the air taut. That automobile was never purchased by me. My own granddaughter used my papers, my name to register it. I found out only after these letters began arriving. But this is not about a car. For months now, envelopes keep coming with debts, loans, bills, obligations I never agreed to. I tried to ignore them. I told myself it must be a mistake. But it isn't. My family has done this to me. Gasps broke out among those seated. In the gallery, some exchanged quick glances, others stared openly at the woman as if they had misjudged the fragile figure before them. She continued, her voice tightening. For nearly 100 years, I believed. Family was my fortress. I worked. I sacrificed. I raised my children, believing they would live better lives. And now my very name is being used as currency. They take my years, my dignity, and spend them as though they were paper. The judge lifted a hand, stopping the clerk, who was ready to move on to the next item. His gaze was fixed entirely on her. What began as a trivial case had cracked open into something grave, something humanly raw that demanded pause. The woman's cane shook slightly in her grasp, but her voice steadied. I came here today not to argue about a parking space. I came because this courtroom may be the last place where my truth can be heard. I may be old, but I am not blind, and I will not leave this earth with my silence serving as their shield. No one moved, even the bailiff, who had seen countless hearings, kept his eyes locked on the woman as though every word carried the weight of evidence. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression heavy now. He spoke softly, almost to himself. This is more than a parking ticket. The old woman nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line as if to hold back the storm of memory and betrayal waiting just behind her composure. The fine on the docket no longer mattered. What had begun as the smallest of cases had just revealed itself as the threshold of a tragedy that reached deep into bloodlines and trust, threatening to shatter the very idea of family. Before everyone present, and the room full of strangers leaned closer, not out of curiosity, but out of an unspoken recognition. This was no longer about one woman. It was about the fear that such betrayal could happen in any home to anyone at any age. She drew a slow breath before continuing, as though peeling back the years cost her more strength than walking with the cane. The judge waited, silent, allowing her story to find its way into the room. I was born in the 1920s, she began, her eyes drifting somewhere far past the walls of the courthouse. We had nothing, yet we survived. Great Depression taught me how to stretch a crust of bread into supper for 3. At 12, while other children played, I was already working in a bakery. Hands raw from dough, lungs full of flour dust. I never complained. That was life. Her words did not carry bitterness, they carried proof. The audience leaned forward. When the war came, my husband was drafted. He returned broken in body, but not in spirit. We built something together. From almost nothing, a small grocery shop on the corner of our neighborhood. He would limp behind the counter, and I would haul the crates of fruit and vegetables. We worked every day of the week, every season, every holiday. Slowly, customers became friends. That shop paid for the roof above our heads, for the schooling of our children. That shop was our pride. She paused, and her hands trembled as if still carrying invisible crates. I Raised 2 children, a son and a daughter. I told myself they will not. No hunger. They will not know the humiliation of begging for work like we did. I wanted them to have choices, so I worked, I saved, I went without. If there was a warm coat, it was for them. If there was meat for supper, I would watch them eat first. Her voice faltered, but only for a second. 20 years ago, my husband died. After 50 years of sharing every burden, I stood. In that house alone, the silence nearly drowned me. My son came and said, "Mother, let me handle everything. You shouldn't worry about bills or papers." At first, I thought it was kindness. He would bring groceries, pay the utilities. I felt cared for. The courtroom's stillness sharpened, but soon I noticed my pension shrinking. I told myself, perhaps the costs are higher now. Then my daughter mentioned one afternoon, "Mama, you're signing too. Many things. These new charges don't look right." I laughed it off. I trusted my son. I believed, how could I not, that a child would never deceive the hand that once held his. That was my mistake. Her gaze hardened, the tremor in her voice replaced with steel. He told me there were loans for the house. Repairs, he said, the roof, the wiring, the plumbing all needed money. He placed papers before me and I signed, never imagining the trap I found. Envelopes with debts, but when I asked, he brushed them aside. Errors, he said, always errors, and I believed him. The room shifted with discomfort. Some lowered their eyes, unable to meet the weight of her confession. One day, my granddaughter showed me her new phone, brand new, expensive. She laughed and said, "Thanks, Grandma." I thought it was a joke, a child's teasing. I didn't understand. Now I do. The judge's pen, which had been resting between his fingers, no longer moved. His gaze was fixed, his jaw set. "I have lived 100 years, she said slowly, and my greatest sin was trusting too much. I gave them my labor, my health, my loyalty. I thought family was sacred. But what I see now is that my faith was their tool. My love became their weapon. No one coughed, no one whispered. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed muted. The woman, who entered the courtroom as a frail centenarian with a parking fine, now stood revealed as someone who had weathered storms far stronger than most could imagine, and who now faced a storm more brutal than any depression or war. The judge's face carried no smile. He did not interrupt, did not attempt to soften her words. He listened, as every soul present, as though history itself were being unspooled from her memory. The old woman shifted her weight, gripping the cane as though the memories themselves pressed down upon her. The courtroom seemed to lean closer, waiting. "It began with a phone call," she said. "A polite voice from the bank. 'Miss, you've missed your payment on a credit card.' I told them they were mistaken. I have never owned such a card. But they insisted. They even sent me copies of the documents. My name was there. My signature, too. Yet I looked at that scroll and knew those were not my strokes. I have written my name the same way for nearly 9 decades. This was forged." She raised her hand, fingers curled as if still holding the paper. "I showed those copies to my son. He told me not to worry. He said, 'It's a mix-up. Mother, these companies make mistakes all the time.' But deep down, something twisted in me. It was the first time I doubted him." Her voice quivered. "Around that time, I began noticing other absences. My husband's gold watch, the one he wore on our wedding day, vanished from the drawer. His service medal was gone too. When I asked my granddaughter, she smiled and said, 'Maybe you misplaced them, Grandma.' Misplaced. I had kept them in the same box for half a century. They were my husband's legacy and now empty space." The spectators exchanged glances. Each detail was a needle stitching together a picture none wanted to believe. "One evening I heard him," she whispered. "My son, I wasn't supposed to, but his door was open and he was on the telephone. I heard him laugh. He said, 'Don't worry. She won't notice a thing. She's 100 years old. She signs whatever I place.'" Before her, those words pierced deeper than any knife. Her hand trembled and the cane tapped the floor like a heartbeat. I stood in the hallway, frozen, my own child mocking me, using my age, my frailty as if they were weapons, as if the years I survived had left me worthless, blind, a shell. In that moment, I understood this wasn't an error. This wasn't confusion. It was betrayal, calculated, cold. The judge leaned forward slightly, his brow tense. "Are you certain?" he asked carefully, her eyes dim but unwavering, locked on his. "Yes, I am certain. It is my blood, my family, and yet it is they who have stripped me of dignity, of trust, of everything I built." She drew a sharp breath, her frail chest rising as if lifting the weight of generations. I considered silence many times. I thought, how could I drag my own Children into court. What mother does such a thing? I prayed at night that, perhaps it was all a nightmare, that I would wake to find my home safe, my name unspoiled, but then I looked in the mirror. I saw the face of a woman who had survived a century, and I said to myself, if I keep silent, I become their accomplice. If I close my mouth, I let them bury me alive beneath lies. The gallery was utterly still, save for the occasional sound of someone shifting uncomfortably in their seat. The bailiff, arms crossed, looked down as if ashamed to hear such confessions. The woman's voice sharpened, no longer wavering but cutting clear. Better to die speaking truth than live, smothered in deception. I would rather face death with my head high than spend my last days cowering before those I once carried in my arms. Her cane struck the floor once more, hollow echo that seemed to underline her vow. The judge asked nothing further. His silence was not indifference but respect. Respect for the courage it took for a 100-year-old woman to stand alone against her own bloodline. And in that silence, the weight of her testimony settled on every person present. The parking fine, the small matter that had opened this case, was now forgotten. What remained was a story no one expected to hear. A life stretched over a century, now torn open by the sharp edge of betrayal, and the gallery. Each man and woman seated there understood. They were witnesses not to a minor proceeding, but to the unraveling of trust itself, one family's tragedy that spoke to a truth none wanted to admit. That sometimes the gravest wounds are inflicted not by strangers, but by those closest to the heart. Her hands shook slightly as she drew a folded envelope from her bag. The paper was creased and worn as though she had opened it countless times with the same disbelief. One morning she said, her voice low, I received a letter. It was not about a card or a bill. It was from the tax office. It told me I owed thousands. If I did not pay my house, the only roof I have ever called mine, could be seized. Her lips trembled. That house. I swept its floors for 70 years. I cooked for my children there, buried my husband from that doorstep. Every photograph, every memory of my life is within those walls. And now they say it could be taken, not because of my debts, but because of papers signed in my name without my hand. She held out the letter. The judge accepted it carefully, scanning the print. It shows another co-owner listed. He said, puzzled, do you recognize this name? Her face darkened with confusion and hurt. No, that name means nothing to me. I never agreed to share my home with anyone, yet somehow my son has bound my property to another. I discovered it here in this document for the first time. Imagine that, a stranger's name, beside yours on the deed to your own house. Murmurs rippled across the courtroom. The reality of fraud was no longer suggestion. It was ink on government stationery. She steadied herself before continuing. The house was not the only blow. One evening, there was a pounding at my door. Men in dark coats stood outside saying I owed $30,000 on a personal loan. They spoke as though I were lying, as though I had taken their money and hidden it away. I told them I have never borrowed a cent in my life. I lived through the depression. I pay cash or I go without. But they did not believe me. They waved papers with my name, my supposed signature. They said if I did not pay, they would keep coming back. Her voice rose not in volume but in force. Do you know what it is to be 100 years old and have strangers bang on your door in the night, to feel your heart race until you fear it will stop? I have faced bombs during the war, shortages of food, but never in my own home did I feel hunted until now. She paused, her cane planted firmly on the floor as if anchoring her to the present. A woman from the gallery, perhaps in her 60s, stood suddenly. She introduced herself as the neighbor. Her voice shook as she addressed the court. It is true, she said. I have seen her son unload new appliances, new furniture. He bragged once, told me all. The accounts were in his mother's name. He said she trusted him too much to ever question. I thought he was joking. Now I see it wasn't. The gallery erupted in murmurs of outrage. The bailiff had to raise a hand for silence. Centenarian closed her eyes briefly, gathering her strength. When she opened them, her gaze was wet but fierce. Your Honor, she said, I am not afraid of death. I have lived longer than most people ever dream. But I am afraid of this, of leaving this world with the knowledge that the very life I work to build has been stolen and twisted by those I once held in my arms. That the home where I cradled my children might no longer be mine. That my name is no longer my own. The words struck like a hammer. For a moment no one breathed. The judge's face was solemn, his gavel resting untouched. The old woman lowered herself into her chair, her body fragile but her will unbroken. Around her the weight of her testimony hung in the air. An indictment not of strangers but of kin, and though the courtroom remained, for the most part silent, one truth pressed upon every witness there. This was not simply about property or money or legalities. It was about the slow erosion of trust, until nothing remains but betrayal so sharp it cuts through generations. She leaned forward slightly as though the strength of her memory pushed her frail body closer to the bench. Her voice steadied now less like confession and more like testimony. I decided I could no longer sit waiting for their next move. If they had stolen my name, I would reclaim it with proof. I went into the attic where I kept my husband's chest. Inside were folders, yellowed with age, full of every receipt, every certificate, every document we ever saved. My hands shook as I opened them, but I forced myself to keep searching. Night after night, by the dim lamp in my kitchen, I compared the letters I had received with the papers from my chest. Her eyes lifted toward the gallery, and I began to see the pattern. There were contracts bearing my name, but the signatures looked clumsy, nothing like the neat cursive I had learned in school. The slant was wrong, the pressure uneven. There were counterfeits page after page, loans, credit agreements, even insurance forms for things I never owned. Refrigerators, cars, electronics, all bought with a name that was mine, but a hand that was not. She pulled another envelope from her bag, holding it carefully. Then I found something I had forgotten existed. A letter my husband wrote before his death. Tucked among the deeds, he wrote, "Never sign anything without counsel. Promise me you will guard our name." Her voice broke slightly. I did not keep that promise. I let grief and trust blind me. The words seemed to press down on the room. Even the judge, hardened by years of cases, lowered his eyes as she read those lines aloud. She drew in a breath, pressing onward. I also discovered bank statements, charges at places I never stepped foot in, luxury stores, electronics outlets, and worse, there were withdrawals made online, accounts accessed with codes I never had. I searched through my granddaughter's old notebooks. She often left them on the dining table. Inside, on the back of a page filled with doodles, I found numbers, sequences, passwords. One of them matched my bank account. My own flesh and blood had written the keys to my life as though it were a game. A stir moved through the spectators. The neighbor who had spoken earlier covered her mouth. Appalled, the old woman's voice hardened. When I showed this to a friend, an attorney who once worked with my husband, he confirmed what I feared. These papers were fraudulent. Every signature forged, every purchase unauthorized. My trust was not simply misplaced. It was exploited with intent. My home, my savings, my very identity became tools for their greed. She leaned back, exhausted but resolute. I brought every page with me today. I want it entered into record, not because I seek revenge, but because truth deserves its place. I will not let my century of life be rewritten by lies inked in my name. She reached again into the bag and produced a small stack of documents bound together with trembling fingers. The bailiff stepped forward to collect them, the weight of the evidence heavy in his hands. Her eyes glistened but did not waver. They thought I would not notice. They thought I was too old, too slow, too weak, but I still know right from wrong. I still know my husband's watch is gone. I still know my signature from a forgery. They underestimated me. The gallery erupted in hushed whispers, rising and falling like waves of disbelief. The judge tapped his gavel, softly, not in reprimand, but to steady the storm of reaction. The woman folded, her hands atop the cane, and looked at him directly. "Your Honor, I am not asking for pity. I'm asking for recognition. Recognition that what has been done is not a mistake, not confusion, but theft. Theft not only of money, but of honor, and that is something no law, no court, no restitution can ever fully restore." For a long moment the courtroom breathed as one, all eyes locked on the centenarian who had turned from victim into warrior. The pile of papers on the clerk's desk no longer looked like ink and fiber. It looked like a century's worth of resilience sharpened into evidence. The old woman sat back, her documents delivered, her truth spoken. The courtroom was not the same as when she had entered. What began as a trivial hearing now carried the weight of an entire century's struggle. The silence was heavy, not with boredom but with reverence. The judge cleared his throat. His voice, usually brisk, carried caution. "Mrs. Dew, you wish to add anything else before this court considers its ruling?" She looked at him steadily, without fear. "Yes, I want to say this. You may punish my son, my granddaughter, whoever the law finds responsible, but the deeper punishment will never come from this bench. It will come from the knowledge that they have destroyed what cannot be replaced. Trust, family, blood," she inhaled. "Slowly, when I leave this world, I will not carry money, property, or papers with me. I will carry only my dignity. And today I have come here to protect that before it is stripped away. Completely, her words rang through the chamber. The judge leaned back, his pen. Motionless, the clerk scribbled, but even her hands shook. Then something unexpected happened. A woman rose from the gallery, another neighbor. She was middle-aged, her voice uncertain at first, but gathering courage. Your Honor, I have witnessed some of this. I saw men deliver boxes late at night to her son's garage. I thought it strange, now I see why. The judge nodded gravely. Your testimony may be required. And then from the opposite side, a man stood. He was no stranger, her own grandson, younger than the others. Scarcely in his 30s, his voice cracked. She is telling the truth, he said, almost shouting. I couldn't bear it anymore. They made me lie. They told me to sign things to help. But I can't sit here and watch her treated like this. She never knew. She never agreed. Gasps rippled across the room. The centenarian turned her head slowly, her eyes filling not with anger but with sorrowful gratitude. You still have a chance, she whispered. The judge's gavel struck sharply. Order, but his tone betrayed something else, respect. He addressed the room with measured gravity. This case began as a petty matter. It has unfolded into something far greater. A revelation of systemic fraud against a woman who should be honored, not exploited. This court will not dismiss her words. Every allegation will be investigated. Every name, every document will be examined. He paused, eyes lingering on the old woman, and I promise you, Mrs., you will not stand alone. Tears welled in her eyes, but her chin lifted. That is all I asked, that truth be seen. The gavel fell again, not to silence, but to signal that justice was no longer a distant dream, but a living pursuit. As she gathered her cane and rose with difficulty, the entire gallery, every stranger, every neighbor, rose with her. Some bowed their heads, others placed hands over their hearts. It was not sympathy alone. It was respect for a century lived with endurance, for courage summoned in the final chapter of her life. She took one slow step then, another toward the door. The sound of her cane echoed not as weakness, but as a drum beat at of defiance. For the first time in many years, she did not feel small. She felt tall, taller than her betrayers, taller even than her own frailty. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air was cool against her face. The sky stretched wide and open. She inhaled deeply. Whatever time remained, it would not be lived in silence. She had spoken. She had been heard, and in that moment, she understood. Though her family had broken her trust, they had not broken her spirit, her name, her dignity, her century of life. These were hers, still, untouched, untouchable. She lifted her eyes skyward. I kept my promise, my love, she murmured to the memory of her husband. I defended our name. And with that, the centenarian walked forward, frail in body, unyielding in soul, into whatever days remained. Her story no longer buried, but written indelibly into the record of truth.